Tay Jiva is a qualified social worker employed by Muslim charity Penny Appeal and the manager of the Adoption and Fostering Project. Salawat.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for inviting me here today. I feel very privileged to be able to do this work and be able to share my knowledge with you all. It was a very appropriate verse of the Quran that we were able to share today, as is the way in this work. There's a lot of things that happen that I feel is Allah's will. The reason why I say it's relevant is because there are some people who would say that Isa alayhi salam was actually technically an orphan, fatherless, as immaculately conceived. So it's a good start to the presentation. So my name is Tay, or Jiva, if you prefer. I am a qualified social worker. I've worked with vulnerable children for 20 years, and I've worked with Penny Appeal for the past 2 years. I set up their adoption and fostering project, which is actually, for the first year, it was effectively just me. But then within the year, alhamdulillah, we got funding from the Department for Education. So currently it's myself. I've got 3 staff in Midlands. So we've been doing, over the last year, we did about 30 recruitment events. I've got a member of staff in Wakefield who is, he coordinates all the work with local authorities and independent fostering providers. And we have a referrals advisor as well, but I will go through that in the presentation. Okay, so this is what I'll be going through today. So I will be going through the introduction to Penny Appeal. Just to check, how many people here have heard of Penny Appeal? It's a fair number, okay. It's a quick introduction. I will tell you about how many Muslim children there are in the care system and how many there are in foster care, which will explain why we're doing this project. I will explain why children are removed from their families, but I can't be too graphic because you have children in the audience, but I will skim over the reasons why children are removed. The difference between adoption and fostering, I'll talk about unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. I know there's a lot of interest in our community about that. I will, there's a short video about an experience of a child in care. I will go through the adoption and fostering team, what we do, what our roles are, and we'll go through what you can do and further information. I've also added to that as well some more information about the Islamic perspective on adoption and fostering. We've done work with over 60 Islamic scholars from throughout the country, and we brought them together with professionals such as myself, Quorum BAF, which is the British Association of Adoption and Fostering, and Coventry University, various directors of children's services. So we all came together as professionals and Islamic scholars to talk about what Islam says about adoption and fostering. So this is a short video about Penny Appeal.
Universe, we can feel small and helpless.
But together, we can make a really big difference.
At Penny Appeal, we work hard each day
to make sure your donations make a big difference all around the world.
In 2016 alone, we fed a staggering 4.5 million people.
Because of your donations, we are feeding the world.
We're responding to emergencies fast. Right now, deep inside Syria, your donations are providing essential emergency relief.
In Iraq, we're providing psychosocial support and counseling.
In Nepal, over 100,000 meals, emergency medical supplies and shelter items were distributed.
In Myanmar, we're providing meals, clothing items, hygiene packs and shelter constructions.
During winter, we delivered over 165,000 meals.
During the last emergency in Pakistan, we delivered 39,000 meals and life-saving clean water.
In Gaza, with your help, we're supplying clean water to schools and hospitals.
Ambulances for the sick, medical rooms and equipment.
You're sending a big message to people like Amina and Mohammed.
Letting them know they're not forgotten. Together, we're providing water in over 12 countries.
In places like Pakistan, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, Kashmir, Sudan and Somalia. We're building well and water systems.
Our solar panel water and power center, as well as providing water, provides power to local schools and homes.
The effect you're having is enormous. You're making a huge difference to orphans around the world.
Our innovative safe orphan villages create an entire community so children can learn, play and be loved in safety. And it's not just the young.
With your help adopting grannies and grandpas, we're helping more and more vulnerable people.
Your donations make life comfortable and keep minds active.
With your help, we're bringing the miracle of sight back to those who've become blind. Can the importance of eyesight be measured? An elderly person seeing their grandchild for the first time.
It's one of our principles that when we start a project abroad,
We do a sister project right here at home in the UK, or vice versa.
like our groundbreaking domestic violence program that supports vulnerable women and children.
From humble beginnings, we're growing. Each day, more and more people are joining Team Orange.
Joining the big fight against poverty.
We're grateful for every single donation,
So we want to say a big thank you.
because what you might see as a simple donation, for a child like Ahmed, it makes a big difference. We can all feel small and helpless sometimes.
But remember, the Prophet Muhammad, may peace and blessing be upon him, was just one person.
And now there are more than 1 billion Muslims. Imagine what we could do if we all made a small change. To pray a little more.
To care a little more.
To give a little more. Penny Appeal. Small change. Big difference.
So alhamdulillah, you can see that Penny Appeal is a huge organisation. There's over 100 staff in England, but then there's hundreds of staff abroad as well. So the Adoption and Fostering Project is actually quite a small component of the work that Penny Appeal does. And as it's targeted towards Muslim communities, Penny Appeal. It's run largely by Muslims, but it is a multi-faith organisation. And it has, to its credit, put its faith into doing adoption and fostering work, domestic violence, UK crisis work, whereas the charitable donations from Muslim communities tends to be for work that's done abroad. I'm very blessed to be part of a charity which has allowed me to bring on other staff and put resources towards finding homes for children, vulnerable children within the UK. So in terms of the number of Muslim children in care, when I actually started with the project, there weren't any figures on that. And one of the reasons for that, actually, the local authorities do not have to record religion in a way that can be reported. But I did do a freedom of information request with all 150 odd local authorities. A third of them couldn't give me data because they didn't record it in a way that could be reported. But based off the figures that we got from the other two, and I extrapolated it up, the estimation is that there's approximately 4,000 Muslim children in care, entering care every year. 3,000 of those enter foster care, and approximately half of those spend time living in non-Muslim homes. So 1,500 Muslim children a year are spending time living in non-Muslim homes. That can be a day, it could be a month, and for some of them it's growing up in non-Muslim homes. So one of our main volunteers, she's called Sonia, she's Pakistani heritage. She actually grew up in foster care, and she went into foster care when she was 3, and she never had a Muslim placement. She had several placement moves, but the first time she lived in a Muslim home that wasn't her mother's, she was in and out of her mother's care. The first time she had a placement that was Muslim was when it was, technically she was leaving care, so it was 16, 18. She actually became Muslim when she was an adult because she never had it explained to her what it meant to be Muslim or to be Pakistani, and her family were not capable of teaching her. So there's numerous cases like that where we feel it would be better for those children to have Muslim homes. In terms of the reasons why children are removed from their families, I know that there are concerns amongst some parts of the community that children are removed unnecessarily, and I'm I'm sure there are some cases where there has been poor judgment by the social worker. However, there's poor practice in every area of life. If a child is removed without good reason and strong evidence, then that is poor practice, and that's something that needs to be dealt with legally. However, the reasons why children are removed, largely because of abuse. So myself as a social worker, I've worked in jobs where I've had to go into families and assess the damage that's being done to the child. And if I was to make an assessment or had concerns that the level of damage or abuse to that child is significant, so the law says significant, it doesn't say what significant is, it just says if it's significant, then social workers consult with education, with health, with every other professional involved in that child's life. And as a team around the child, we make a decision as to whether that child needs to be removed. At that point, police are usually involved as well because it's significant abuse. The decision to permanently remove a child is always made by a judge. In some cases, children are relinquished, which means that the parents themselves say, we can't look after this child. Sometimes that happens with babies, so mothers who perhaps are not married and feel that they can't keep their children, or mothers who don't want to keep the children because of their partners or because of their own circumstances. Social workers will always try and keep the child with the parent because it's the right thing to do, but also to remove a child is really expensive. So even if you sort of take the more skeptical, critical approach of, even if a social worker or social services didn't care, which from my experience, I would say they do very much care for children, but even if they didn't, the motivation to remove a child is very low because for one, it's not good for the child, but also it's really expensive to put a child through the care system and there's no resources to do that. So actually, the pressure is to do the opposite, is to keep the child in placement. With the parents, sorry. And in terms of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, there are large numbers of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children in the country. They've always been here. England has always had unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. There has been an increase over the last few years. This has been decreasing recently because the government has put a stop on the number of unaccompanied children who can come in. They are a fraction of children who are already in the care system. There are Muslim children that need homes and there are non-Muslim children that need homes. There are unaccompanied children that need homes. They are all children, whether they are whichever nationality they are, whichever colour they are, whichever religion they are children. We're talking about children. So from our perspective, if you want to become a foster carer, then you need to be open to caring for children. If you want to be an adopter, you can be more specific about who you think would fit your family. In terms of sort of going to the difference between adoption and fostering, this is something that for Penny Appeal, we've had to do extra work here where local authorities and independent providers, they're not able to provide the level of advice we do. We know that in Muslim communities, there's a lot of people who do not know the difference between adoption and fostering. And local authorities and independent providers are not set up to help you learn about that. They expect you to already know that. So the main differences between adoption and fostering. Adoption is when you want to bring a child into your home on a permanent basis. If you want to have a child in your home that calls you mum and dad and will stay with you forever and you won't have any social workers coming to your house, the child may call you mum and dad, they might not call you mum and dad. But if that's the relationship you want, if you want to be the legal parent to a child, then what you are looking for is adoption. Adoption will give you parental responsibility of that child. So legally you can make decisions. That does not mean that you tell that child that they were born to you. That's not encouraged. It's not encouraged by social workers and it's not encouraged by Islam. The child, if you adopt a child, the child should come to you with a life story book, which has pictures of the birth family. It has information about where they were born. It should have pictures of what their life was like before they came to you. If that child is a newborn when that child comes to you, they will still have information about their birth family appropriate for the age of that child. The child should also have a later life letter, which means that when the child is an adult, about 18, or as a parent, you can make that decision when that child is able to process the information. That later life letter will be given to the child when they're older and able to understand the information, and the later life letter will be much more open about the circumstances which led that child coming into your placement, into your home. From my experience of working with children in care, where parents are open with the child about, look, the way it's explained to them is that for Muslim families, the way they would explain it is, Allah never meant for you to come to my house through my tummy. Allah always meant for you to come to my house through somebody else's tummy, but now I'm your mummy and I'm your daddy, and that's what was meant for you, and that's okay, because we still love you and I'm still your mum and dad. And actually the children I've worked with just accept that. Children do. Young children tend to sort of just say, okay, if you're okay with it, they're okay with it. Where we have problems in adoption is where the adoptive parent themselves holds really difficult feelings around the adoption status. If adopters are not comfortable about the relationship that they have with the child, that adoptive relationship, it places that child at a greater risk of being uncertain about where they fit in the family. But from my experience, most adoptive children, where the parents are open, the children are like, what does it matter? Especially if the parents are saying it doesn't matter. The child tends to say it doesn't matter, and it shouldn't matter. For adoption as well, in terms of the age range, if you want to adopt a child, if you want to adopt a child, then generally people adopt. Most people tend to ask to bring in children between the ages of about 0 to 3, but some local authorities like Birmingham will not take any referrals for or any applications where people are saying they only want to adopt up to the age of 3, because they already have 6 Muslim adoptive applicants waiting. So what we say is, if you're applying, I know this is not Birmingham, but we do a lot of work in Birmingham. So if you were to apply for Birmingham, we would say that if you can increase to the age of 6, so you will take a child in up to the age of 6, then we can put your application forward. Otherwise, we can't. A lot of people are quite open, actually, will take older children as well. Fostering is different, because fostering is more about temporary care. So whereas adoption is like becoming a mum and dad, fostering is more like babysitting the child, or like being an auntie or an uncle to the child. But saying that, sometimes children in foster care will call their parents mum and dad, because that's how they feel. Sometimes children need someone to call mum and dad. You would never say to a foster child, call me mum and dad, but the child might choose to do that. It's temporary, but that could mean 1 day, or foster care can mean 21 years. It's unlikely to be 21. A child can stay in placement in your foster home until they're 21 years old, but it's very unlikely that they will join you at birth and then stay till 21, because actually children under the age of 6-ish tend to get adopted if they're going to stay permanently in care. But a lot of foster carers look after teenage children, and those teenage children will stay till they're 21. If you foster a child, it is a bit like a professional role. There is a big debate in fostering at the moment as to whether foster carers are professionals or not professionals, and they're very much in between. They're like carers, they're like mums and dads, but also they get paid for what they do. So a lot of foster carers will say that what they get paid, which is allowances, actually doesn't cover the cost of the child, like caring for the child, the food, the clothes, the mileage, the bills, everything else. It's less than minimum wage. So in terms of the motivation to foster, if it's finances, it's not a good motivation. The work, the caring is too difficult. There's easier work to do if you want to do it for the money. However, particularly for carers who are going to care for maybe teenage children or more than one child, for some foster carers, it can be an alternative to employment. So it depends. If you're going to look after babies, it tends to not cover your costs, to put it bluntly, because there's such a high level of demand. Like, a lot of foster carers are willing to care for babies, so actually they don't, they won't get paid as much. Whereas when it comes to teenagers, children with disabilities, sibling groups, ethnic minorities, children with challenging behaviours, they are all hard to place and they can be harder to look after. So the allowances there can be higher, and that would be seen more as a more professional fostering role, because there's more training expected, more commitment, more paperwork, more supervision from social workers as well. With fostering, there is a lot of training. Both fostering and adoption have a very thorough assessment at the beginning, and fostering will involve regular training throughout the time that you have children in your care, and even the gaps between having children in care, you will be expected to attend training. With adoption, you'll do your assessment, you'll do training, but then once the child is in your home and living with you, it's up to you what you do, because legally that's your child. So the same as, social worker can't tell me what to do with my child unless they have concerns. It's the same relationship between an adopted child and an adoptive parent. In terms of caring for unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, the majority of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, so these are refugees, effectively some people call them refugees, but they're actually technically asylum-seeking children. The majority who come over that need a foster home are teenagers. They're not young children. We don't tend to get babies and 2-3-year-olds who found their way to England on their own without a carer. It tends to be teenagers who've got onto a lorry or onto a boat or have been trafficked across. These are the children that need homes. For people who are not involved in fostering or don't know foster carers, that might sound like quite a daunting task to bring in an unaccompanied child into the home, particularly when there can be some negative press around that. From experience and from speaking to foster carers, those who do care for unaccompanied children will themselves, all the ones I've spoken to, have said that it's a lot easier than caring for British children in care and also babies. And on the whole, foster carers who care for teenagers, they tend to say that they didn't plan to care for teenagers, but now they do, they would never go back, because it's a different type of care, it's a different level of need for the child. It's different things that the child needs, and often, even though teenage children can be challenging, a lot of foster carers will say that's easier. With unaccompanied children, the challenges and the help that they need can be around trauma. So there might be things like flashbacks, nightmares, missing their family. So that's where you need to support this child, in particular, learning English. A lot of unaccompanied children will pick up English really quickly, where some carers will find it easier to look after unaccompanied children. A lot of them have had really good parenting in the past. So they've had a good upbringing, they've got good values. They come into your house, they call you auntie, they call you uncle, they're respectful. They really want an education. They really want to learn. So for a lot of foster carers, they can work with that and they find that easier to work with. I'm just going to show a short video.
We all have giants. People we look up to.
They're going to taste good. No!
Yeah?
They will probably taste good. Love baking.
People who teach us what it is to share.
You do this one. It's really lovely.
People who teach us what it is to live. And what it is to live.
I think they're cute because I'm in them.
People who help us belong. And show us what it is to care. The people we aspire to be. People who show us the way forward.
Be careful.
Who show us what it is to dream. We all have giants.
Is that your best smile?
But some giants are smaller than others.
This way down there. Hello. You okay? Nice to meet you. Is this where you're going to be living?
can't watch that video. So whenever it's on, I have to try and think about something else. Otherwise, you'd have me sat here in tears, and that's probably not a good thing. So, but that video is, it's a really good example of actually what it is for a child in the care system. And I've worked in children's homes, and I've worked with children in foster care and adoptive placements, and I've worked all over the place, and it really is. And the reason why that strikes me so much as a clip is, it's not, you might look at it and think, oh, it's exaggerated, it's not really like that. It really is like that, and that's really how important it is. And at the moment, there is this campaign for foster carers and adopters of siblings, because actually, sadly, for a lot of children in care, where foster carers and adopters only want one child, if you have one child who's maybe 2-3 years old, but then they have a brother or sister who's 6 or 7 years old, the 2-3-year-old will get fostered or adopted, will get adopted. Every child will find a foster placement. But for adoption, you can find an adoptive placement for a 2 or 3-year-old. But it's very difficult to adopt a 7-8-year-old. But you can see from that clip how important it is. And, if you have children, just heartbreaking to think, what is it like for siblings to be separated? I have 2 young children myself, right? And the way I think about the relationship between my children is, when I pass, they will have each other, right? Their relationship will go far beyond, inshallah, will go far beyond my relationship with them. But that doesn't happen for a lot of children who are adopted. They can end up losing contact with their siblings. So in terms of the team, if I go on to who the team are for adoption and fostering, there's myself. I don't put that up there to brag, but it is really important that projects like this, where we do have some involvement with vulnerable children, it does require the oversight of somebody who has considerable experience, which is why, in terms of the experience I have with vulnerable children and the qualifications I have, which is why the Department for Education were able to fund the project, knowing that I'm not going to go out there and say something horrendous that's going to end up on the front page. I'm not going to place children at risk. We don't do any direct work with children because I refuse to take that risk. Also, I gave evidence at the fostering inquiry 2 weeks ago. I have regular contact with the Department for Education. So in terms of the Muslim community and our input into government level decisions about what happens in Muslim communities, we do need people with qualifications and experience to manage that. We have community engagement workers. So at the moment, we have 3 community engagement workers in Birmingham to do, Midlands, to do intensive work there. From December, we're looking to have workers in London, Birmingham, Manchester and Wakefield. So we'll have part-time posts in each area, because we've done the intensive work to find out what works and how to recruit Muslim carers, and now we can streamline that work across the country. We have an assessor, a referrals coordinator, the care experience volunteer, and we do, of course, have the support of all of Penny Appeal. Penny Appeal is quite a large organisation, and I can tap into any of their staff and resources where I need them. In terms of what we do, so we have community events. In the Midlands, we had 30 events this year, and inshallah within the next few months, when we work nationally, then we can start holding events all over the country. Our assessments and referrals, Penny Appeal is the only organisation in the country that has the contact details of all the adoption and fostering providers in England. I am not aware of the government having that. When I met with Department for Education last week, they said they don't have that information, which is quite absurd, but it is what it is. They don't have that information. So if I want to send out an email to all adoption and fostering providers in the country, it will take me about 5 minutes to do that. I have to tell our developer who has access to our system, I will send him an email and he will do it, and he's very quick. Department for Education can't do that. Core and BAF, the fostering network, no other organisation in the country has those details. The reason we have those details is because if anyone wants to become an adopter or foster carer, if you were to apply through Penny Appeal, we would do an assessment with you. The assessment would be about 40 minutes. Some people have a lot of questions, so it can take them 3 hours sometimes. But really, the assessment's about 40 minutes just to check that you have the basic information for adoption and fostering. We would then refer you to all the providers in your area. So if you were to apply from Harrow and you wanted to foster, we would send an anonymous referral. So we'd have information about whether you have a spare bedroom, what age range, whether you want to foster and adopt, if you have a police history, social care history. We collect all of that information. We anonymise it. We will send it to the local authority and all the independent providers in your area. So effectively all the private fostering organisations in your area. There'll be about 30. And then we'll ask them who wants to actually meet you as an applicant. We expect out of 30 independent or private organisations, there might be about 10 who say they want to meet you. We'll always send your contact details to the local authority, and we will pick the 3 best independent providers. We pick the best ones based on their contract with the local authority, their Ofsted ratings and their allowances. Usually between the contract level and the Ofsted ratings, we can pick the top 3. We then send your contact details to those 4 organisations, the local authority, 3 independents, and we will also send you an email with a list of who we've sent the details to and all the information we have about each provider. We don't charge the applicant, we don't charge the provider because we don't want any barriers with that process. We expect the providers to then contact you as an applicant, and then we will call you again in 4 weeks and then 6 weeks, 3 months, 6 months, just to check everything is going okay and to ask you, is there anything else we can do to help you? So it's a fully charitable project. It's a fully charitable sort of approach to this as well. And what we plan to do, and the reason we use this method is if you yourself wanted to become a foster carer, you might call the local authority, but if they say no, you could then try an independent provider, probably through a Google search, but it's near impossible for you to find. Well, if you wanted to find the details of all the providers in your area, you would have to go to the Ofsted website. A lot of people don't know that. Then when you go to the Ofsted website, you'd have to go back to the providers' websites to find their contact details. For you to do that with 30 organisations is going to be extremely difficult for you to do. You then can't ask them what their allowances are. You can find their Ofsted rating, but you most likely wouldn't know to ask them about the contracts that they have with the local authority. We have all that information, and at no cost to the applicants, and really for very little time, we just give it all to you. And that will increase your chances of you becoming an approved foster carer or adopter, but also we ensure that you will only go to organisations that are good organisations. We don't want you going to organisations that are Ofsted required improvement, or sometimes there are organisations who aren't even Ofsted registered recruiting foster carers. That won't happen if you come through us, because we check about the provider first. Then when you go to them, because they are good organisations, you will stay with that organisation. That's the theory. Because if you're with a good organisation, you will stay, which means these children who are in care will have foster carers who are supported well. We're looking to do identity boxes. With the identity boxes, it's a high quality gift box. And inside there, we were going to just do them for Muslim children, but actually on reflection, we're going to do them for all children in care. So Muslim children will receive a Muslim supplement. So we'll have prayer mat, beads, compass, head covering. For Jewish children, we'll speak to Jewish organisations if there is a need for that. We'll work with children of all faith groups to give them something that's important to them. The reason we haven't actually started the gift boxes yet is it's really important that it's a very high quality gift box that child feels is special, because it's a gesture from us as a community to that child to say we value you. Now in truth, obviously I found a lot of boxes that are actually very high quality, but to put it bluntly, the cost that has been coming to me so far is not something that I'm willing to pass on to potential foster carers or even to donors. So we're still in the process of finding a very high quality gift box, which is well priced, basically. One of the reasons for that gift box is that children in foster care in particular, they move placements a lot. This is a big problem in foster care, that a child sort of can move 3 times a year, right? Sometimes more. Sometimes what used to happen in the past, and rarely happens but can happen, is the placement can break down very quickly. If that happens, sometimes the child might end up throwing all their belongings into a black bin bag and then going to the next placement. Sometimes things can get broken, things can get lost. My friend, who's the volunteer who came through foster care, I asked her for some photographs recently, and she managed to find about 5 or 6 photographs of her as a child. And if I compare that to my own children, we have thousands. You know, I have thousands of photographs of my children. I have boxes and boxes of memorabilia, you know, of things they did at school and all bits of junk that they want to keep. If they want to keep it, it's there and it's in a box and it's in the attic. But the difference with a child in care is they move, and who is there to say, actually, every memory is important. I'm going to keep every memory. She never had that, so she's got about 5 photographs. With the gift box, we want this to be somewhere where the child can keep like any special gifts that they've got, any photographs, the diary, everything that's special to them, it's in that special place, and it'll be personalised. So that's something we're working on anyway. Professionals training, so I deliver training to local authorities, independent providers, voluntary adoption agencies. The training is anti-discriminatory practice, working with Muslims. So the training is suitable for any social work or social sector professionals. So I've worked with legal staff, admin, panel members, foster carers, adopters, social workers. If we work with vulnerable children, the training is suitable. It's targeted at non-Muslims so that they are better able to support Muslim community groups. So day 1 of the training is 2-day training. Day 1 is about the British Muslim perspective. So it's about what's the normal experience of being a British Muslim. You know, what do normal Muslims look like? You know, put to the side everything you hear in the press. Some of that represents a very small proportion of our society. So myself and another Muslim support worker will deliver the training. Day 2 is about professional skills development. So from day 1, it opens people's eyes a little bit more to what it can mean to be British Muslim. Day 2 is about how social workers need to use that knowledge to do good assessments and good support, good intervention. There's academic research as well. So we have commissioned Coventry University to do academic research. That research is going on now, and that should be finished at the beginning of next year. So by the end of this year, beginning of next year, and that will go out into journals and articles, and there'll be sort of big releases. And that's about the British Muslim understanding and perspectives on adoption and fostering, how that's working within organisations, how that's working in terms of placement. They will also look at the project being run by Penny Appeal and do an assessment of that and its effectiveness and where it's worked and where it's not. And point 6 on this, which is last on the list, but I think is probably the most popular aspect of the work that we do, is the Islamic guidance document. In terms of the guidance document has been, again, it's been commissioned out, and it's run by, or it's been led by Sheikh Zubair Karim, who's based in Scotland, and Imam Abdullah Hassan, Imam Abdullah Hassan set up Imams Against Domestic Abuse and BISCA, the British Imams Awards. He now works for Penny Appeal. So he started working on the adoption and fostering project. We commissioned him to do the work. We were so impressed with what he did that we managed to persuade him to join Penny Appeal. Now, the Islamic guidance document, that's effectively going through the stuff that I've just done. So the Islamic guidance document, the way we put the document together was that the Sheikh and Imam liaised and spoke to over 60 Islamic scholars. They had 2 symposiums. One was in London, and we had a smaller one in Birmingham. And the scholars sat with social work professionals. So at the first symposium, there was our researcher from Coventry University, and there was a director of an independent fostering provider. The researcher at Coventry University is actually an adopter herself, and the director of the independent fostering provider is a white British non-Muslim. So they brought different perspectives. They started to introduce the scholars to the reality of adoption and fostering in the UK. In the second symposium, it was myself, Coram Bath, which is the British Association of Adoption and Fostering, Coventry University came. We had other directors as well and professionals. So we had more professionals at the second symposium, a smaller group of Islamic scholars, and we were really able to thrash out that, look, this is the needs of British Muslim children in care, and we need you to make decisions about how we can care for these children. So I'm going to give you a quick overview. This is a very preliminary findings from the Islamic guidance document. The actual document, we've done the summary document. We're still editing the full guidance document, but that should be out early next year. So these are the considerations that we've discussed so far. So one of the concerns, these are the concerns, these are the things that needed to be considered in terms of Islamic jurisprudence. In terms of lineage, as I've already explained, when it comes to fostering, the child's, the parental responsibility remains with the birth parents or it's with social services. But if you foster the child, you do not have parental responsibility of that child. So if you want to take the child on holiday, if you want to book the child in for non-emergency medical procedures, for a lot of school meetings, there's a lot of things that require, you can't change the child's surname if you foster, because all these things need parental responsibility. You need to have the legal parental responsibility of the child. So when it comes to fostering lineage and the heritage and changing the child's surname, that's quite clear. You can't do it. Therefore, Islamically, it's very clear cut that there's no issues there. The reason why some people believe there are issues in terms of lineage and in terms of changing the child's surname is because in the Quran it says call them by their names. The reason it says in the Quran call them by their names is because Prophet ﷺ, he adopted a child, Zayd bin Haritha. But the revelation call them by their names meant that Zayd bin Haritha's name, whose name had been changed to Zayd bin Muhammad, had to be changed back to Zayd bin Haritha. Because in 7th century Arabia, bin Haritha meant that that was the son of Haritha. So the surname at that time meant a different thing to what it means now. So the call them by their names effectively means do not lie to that child about their heritage. Do not lie to that child about who their birth parent is, and do not lie to other people about that either. In terms of social work practice, and in terms of Islamic guidance, that is good advice. You should not lie to your child about who their birth parent is. You don't have to give them a name, but equally you can't pretend like that is your biological child. In terms of adoption, which is where some people, like if you did an internet search on whether it's permissible to adopt a child, there is some information online which suggests that you should not adopt a child because of the parentage and the lineage issue. However, when it comes to the way adoption is practiced within the UK, what adoption does is it gives you the legal right to make decisions which you could not make if you were fostering. Adoption does not mean you lie to the child. So Islamically, the revelation and the actual guidance can be maintained if you adopt the child. In terms of literally changing the child's surname, what the scholars have said, but this requires further discussion, they've not all reached consensus on this part, but what they have said is if your belief is that when a woman gets married and she changes her surname, if you believe that that is okay, because Islamically that is not technically the thing you should do. I kept my surname after I got married, but that was my choice. But, because I'm a feminist, it is what it is. I kept my surname. But if Islamically, if I were to change my surname, if you felt that I had not sinned, because actually I'm not denying my heritage by changing my surname when I got married, then actually you could apply that to a child who's been adopted to say if you change that child's surname, you're not denying the child's heritage, because actually I'm not calling myself, Tayyaba, the daughter of whoever, if I had changed my surname. It's a different purpose and use of surnames. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of adoption is actually you don't have to change the child's surname. If it is safe for the child to do so, the judge can agree to that child keeping their birth surname. Where that is problematic is if that child came from an abusive home, then you may need to change that child's surname to keep that child safe, particularly with social media. The alternative is you could choose a surname which isn't the child's surname, the birth surname, and it isn't your surname, but it's a neutral surname, and there is advice in the full document about which surname you could use. So, to summarize the adoption and fostering aspects of what's permissible or not, the way I would put it is there are children out there there are young children, there are babies who do not have mums and dads, who want mums and dads, who want loving homes, who want to be part of a family. If you feel that our religion teaches you to not give a home to those children, bearing in mind Prophet ﷺ was an orphan, bearing in mind he adopted a child, for me personally, obviously I'm going to say that's problematic, and I would say that that is certainly not my interpretation of what Islam teaches us. In terms of the other issues, hijab, basically in terms of hijab, they said, of course, observe hijab, but it is not a reason to not adopt or foster. If there are women who do not observe hijab in the home or outside the home, we do not make judgments on that compatibility of that with adoption and fostering, because actually adoption and fostering is a big thing and it's a huge service that they are doing, and it's a separate issue to the hijab issue. It's two separate things. The document will go through milk nursing as well. We talk about the physiological bonding and mahram and the ways that the child can become mahram to the family, which applies to adoption, not fostering. I can't go into it in great detail here, partly because I'm not the Islamic scholar, but also because of time, largely. The document talks about marriageability and the complexities around that issue, guardianship, inheritance and wills, looking after non-Muslim children. So they're all the Islamic considerations. If you want me to go into any of those specifically, then I'm happy to do so via your questions, or I'll be around afterwards. In terms of the recommendations, these are the recommendations from us at Penny Appeal, Adoption and Fostering, but actually these are actually the recommendations of the Islamic scholars as well, which is, if you are able to do so, become adopters and foster carers. Currently we're in a situation where actually adoption and fostering is underrepresented in Muslim communities. We should be at the forefront. And what the scholars are saying is that Islamically it's an obligation for us to care for our orphans. Therefore, Islamically, it's a communal obligation that where you are able to do so, adopt or foster. If you are not able to adopt or foster, then support the adoption and fostering project. For Islamic scholars, they are welcome to join the scholarly working group, hold khutbahs, hold events like this. This is a fantastic start. Invite sector professionals to work with your community. So what I've started doing in the Midlands is we're holding meetings between local authorities and the local imams and scholars. We're bringing them together so that they can share their experiences and knowledge and start making plans for how they're going to work together to support children in our communities. Signpost applicants to appropriate services, including Penny Appeal. We have said Penny Appeal because, like I said, we are the only organisation in the country, Muslim and non-Muslim, who do the referral service. Disseminate the guidance. So when the Islamic guidance document comes out and when the academic research comes out, share that information, share the knowledge. Form local working groups, support children in care. This is, in terms of supporting children in care, this is, again, another difficult situation that we're in as a Muslim community. Currently, we have Muslim children who are in Muslim homes where the Muslim homes are not, some parents don't feel comfortable being open about either fostering or adopting because there is some criticism from the community. So that's something we need to address. But also, we have Muslim children living in non-Muslim homes where actually the non-Muslim carers don't know where to go for support, advice or help. They can't keep coming to me because actually there's very little I can do in terms of the Islamic education of that child. It's difficult for the non-Muslim carers because actually a lot of mosques are not open all the time and they don't know when to come in, they don't know the appropriate etiquette. And also when the child comes here, that child could be in a very difficult and potentially quite a dark time of their life. They could be struggling with a lot of things. So to then hand them over to an imam who might not understand this child's behaviour or their language, there is nowhere that I am aware of at the moment where there are imams who are trained to work with children who've been through abuse. But that, again, that's something that if we bring the local authorities together with our imams, that the local authorities can support with that, use the expertise of the local authorities and actually the expertise of the imams and bring it together and support children in care. And alongside that as well is, for our communities to welcome everybody who's linked to that child. So whether it's the social workers, whether it's the carers, and actually some of these carers, that they really want to work with Muslim community groups, but I know if they walked through the doors of most mosques, many eyebrows would be raised and it would be very difficult for them to engage. So that's a quick overview of all our work, sort of a snapshot of our work. I know it was a lot to take in. I hope I've answered most of the questions that you had about adoption and fostering. And if you have any questions, then feel free.
Salawat. You have time for questions?
Hey, Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Firstly, thank you so much for everything you do. My wife and I are very interested in adoption and fostering. When does the Islamic guidance document come out?
It comes out, we've got the summary document done, but we have to work on the full guidance document. We've been working on it for a year now. It's been a sensitive piece of work because to bring together 60 Islamic scholars to agree on all those points has been hard, right?
To get one Islamic scholar to agree with himself is hard.
Well, do you know what? Alhamdulillah, when I started the work with Penny Appeal 2 years ago, I was not aware of one Islamic scholar in the country who was able to speak with authority about adoption and fostering. I now know one imam who is a foster carer, who works in many, many other sectors, so it's a case of, well, to get his time to do this work, but he's on board. Now we've started that process with them, and I'm really keen that we don't rush it. So we could have, there's been a push for it to be like, come on, let's get it finished, but it has to be just right. If you want the headlines of the summary document, then we've drafted that. That should be ready in the next few weeks. I reckon we will put it up on our website within the next 2 months max.
Okay.
In terms of the full guidance document, so if you want all the the Islamic verses and evidence and text and it padded out, that's likely to be about another 4 or 5 months.
So two things. One is to help ourselves. One may be to help you and other people. The one to help you within our community, I can think of at least one scholar who's adopted and one scholar who's fostered and gone through that whole educational piece.
Yeah.
And I say that because as Shia, within the Shia madhab, we have slightly different fiqh. Actually, lots of different fiqh within ourselves. But that might be helpful.
It would be very helpful. We have tried to get Shia scholars on board. It's just easier to get Sunni because there's so many of them in reality, right? But my understanding from speaking to Imam Abdullah is the Shia scholars we have on board at the moment weren't able to attend the symposium, but they are involved remotely. But the experience of adopters and foster carers who are able to speak in this forum is invaluable, particularly if they come from both perspectives. So alhamdulillah, we do have some really strong scholars, like one of them's a psychiatrist, so he comes with real authority. And I mean, Islamically, his knowledge is phenomenal. But to have adopters and foster carers on board as well, it would be fantastic.
So before the end of today, either myself or Miqdad knows them as well. We'll give you those contact details. From our point of view, if we want to get more information, is there like a mailing list, or how do we find out about?
Yeah, there is. If you leave me your contact details. Sorry, I came from Bolton today and I forgot to bring all my collateral. Leave me your contact details and I'll put you on our mailing list. So we have a database. So in terms of our referral system, where I said we refer out to all these organisations, as you can imagine, logistically, for the first year I was trying to do it by myself. It's a nightmare, trying to send out to 30 organisations and then waiting for their replies and organising it. Well, alhamdulillah, Penny Appeal has a developer who's been working on other stuff. When I found out he was there, I worked with him to set up a database. All of it now is automated. Even when they reply back to us, the reply is read by the system and it gets filed in the right place for the right person. So everything's automated. Alongside that as well, we can put your details as somebody who's on our mailing list. If you wanted to do the assessments, we could do the assessments with you. If not, we can just add you to the mailing list.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
For that, two issues. One is that this is a very similar problem to what some of our friends are having with organ donations.
Yeah.
Same kind of background and scholarly involvement and whatever. Yeah? So you might want to. I'll give you contact of the person who is coordinating that.
Yeah.
It might give you some experience of scholars who are more approachable and so on. Yeah. The second is that I know you have mentioned that non-Muslims coming into Muslim families as foster children or adoptive children or whatever. You saw the controversy in the press about that one particular case, which was blown out of
Tower
Hamlets place. And I thought the role of the judge there was very interesting and important. So have you got any more information on that, or?
Yeah, so the Tower Hamlets case was basically the Times had reported Muslim child forced into Christian foster home, and the Times, and then the Mail had copied and pasted that article basically. So the Times had said that what it seems to have happened is that the child went on contact with the birth mother, and from reading between the lines, it looked to me like the contact worker who observes contact made some assumptions and misjudgments and took them to the Times, which is very odd. The contact workers don't tend to know very much information about families, and I've worked as a social worker who's had to take children to contact. I wouldn't tell the contact worker anything other than risk. So you tell the contact worker that the child presents this risk, the parents present this risk or not, this is what to look out for, that's all they know. It seems that that contact worker has then done 1 + 1 is 50 and then gone to the Times with it. And then the Times has reported that this Muslim family has ripped the cross off the child, which actually, what it seems was the child was at risk from having a necklace, as there was a choking risk for whatever reason. So the local authority had asked for that to be removed from the neck. The Times had reported that the Muslim foster carers didn't speak English. It's turned out since then that they do speak English, but they had said that they don't speak English. But even though they don't speak English, the child had picked up that the foster family had been abusive about white British people, which didn't even make sense in itself. So basically everything the Times had said about this fostering family was, all of it was unfounded. It was investigated by the local authority. There were independent visitors who'd gone into, reviewing officers who'd gone into the house, investigated. There was no evidence for any of this. The child is subsequently now living with her grandmother, and it has recently been reported that she misses her foster carers. They'd also said in the Times that the child had been forced into foster care. This child is, I think she was 5 years old. It's not often that a social worker would sit with a 5-year-old child and say, we have to remove you from your birth family. Here is a selection of foster carers. Which one would you like to go to? As a social worker, you have to make, you don't have a selection. You don't have a range. There's a shortage of foster carers as there is. You're lucky, you just have to find the best one that fits and then put the 5-year-old in that placement. So, yeah, it was just poor reporting, which reflected badly. In terms of placing non-Muslim children into Muslim homes, was that sort of your question as well? So from the Islamic guidance document, they addressed that as well. And what the scholars have said is ultimately, as Muslims, we should try and open our homes to children. Full stop, the end. We expect non-Muslim carers to respect the religion and the culture and the identity of Muslim children. We expect Muslim carers to do the same for non-Muslim children. I have been to talks prior to being with Penny Appeal. I have been to adoption and fostering talks where I've heard the speaker imply that it is okay if a non-Muslim child happens to start becoming Muslim in your placement. It's all good. And I just sat there and thought, if we went to a church and heard the same thing about Muslim children in Christian homes, I would be horrified. I was not happy with that either. Now, the reality is, if you are bringing a non-Muslim child into your home and they stay there for a number of years, and then they choose to become Muslim, they choose to become Muslim. We have to be prepared, and we have to accept the fact that of those 1,500 Muslim children going into non-Muslim homes, regardless of the views of the parents, actually some of those children are going to be interested in the religion of their foster parents or their adoptive parents. It is what it is, but ultimately you've got to do what's best for the child, which is to educate them about their religion and then let them make their own choice. Educate them about their culture and let them make their own choice. Definitely do not lie to them or make them feel any shame or discomfort about their heritage or religion.
Assalamu alaikum, Tay Jiva. That was a brilliant presentation. I might have missed something. I'd just like to get it off my head first. That's a little thing. So when you said that you select a family, or somebody applies, a Muslim couple applies to foster or adopt a child, you take them through this process. Now, do I understand right that at the end of that, the local offers that come from the firms that you recommend, did I understand that it could be a non-Muslim child that's coming into your home, or?
During the assessment, we ask a number of questions. Now, the reason we do the assessment, rather than sort of anyone who applies to us immediately just forwarding you to providers, is partly because we want people to be ready when they approach the providers, but also we need to maintain our reputation to be sending forward good quality applicants. So the questions that we ask are around, for one, do you want to become an adopter or foster carer? We check that people understand the difference. Do you have a spare bedroom? Are you willing to care for children of other ethnicities and other religions? So we ask that up front. If someone wants to become a foster carer and they say, actually as a foster carer, I don't want to care for non-Muslim children. So what we would say to them is, well, what is the reason for that? Now, the most valid reason for that would be, well, my lifestyle is heavily influenced by my religion. So on Fridays I go to the mosque, we pray in the house, I live in a very Muslim area. So actually for a child, that might be difficult. So for a foster carer to say, look, I'm thinking about what's best for that child and that child might be uncomfortable, that's a valid reason. If a foster carer says, well, I just don't really I kind of really want to help Muslim children because I'm Muslim, that's not so valid and not a great reason to not look after because that's about you. That's about you saying, well, my needs is greater than the child's need. What we would say to the foster carers is, okay, you're willing to care for Muslim children between the ages of 6 and 18. What if you get a phone call to say that there is a 7-year-old girl who's white British, non-Muslim, she turned up to school, she's got a massive bruise on her face, not the first time, she's fractured a cheekbone, she's distraught, but you live near her school, you're the closest person near to her school. If we don't put her with you, she has to move schools, right? So she's not just lost a family, she's lost all her friends. And actually this is temporary, we don't know. We can't say how long she's going to be in a foster placement. Would you take that child into your home? And invariably people say, well, yeah, obviously I would. That's it, job done. You take non-Muslim children into your home. Because the reality is when you're faced with a child who's traumatized, actually most people will say, well, yeah, we can't say no, can we? That also happens with age ranges in fostering as well. So a lot of people will approach us and they'll say, well, I think I could only really care for a child up to the age of 10 because I think that's all I can manage. Now, we will tend to say 10 is okay, as long as you're not saying 5 or 6. 10 or 11 is okay. But we know that by the time you finish training, you're going to be like, actually, maybe I could do 12, 13. By the time we've called you 6 times, or your social worker's called you 6 times and said, what about this child, what about this child? They're 14, they're 15, they're 16, they're this. And you've said, no, 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 no. 6 months later, you'll say, I'll try. And then you'll do it, and then you'll develop love for that child. And then when that child leaves, you'll say, oh, I could do it again. So these things change with I've delivered training to foster carers where at the end of, and I'm very honest on the training. So I'm not somebody who'll be like, oh, it's going to be great, it's going to be fine, I won't sugarcoat it. I'll be like, look, this is how hard it can be. The child might do this, might do this, I'll save it for training. I'm not going to go through it now. You can enjoy all of that when you go on training yourself. But actually, because I'm so brutally honest with the carers and we talk about the reasons why it's so hard, so again, there's children here, so I won't be too graphic. But we will explain, if you see this in a child, the reasons are likely to be this. So the people who are on training will think to themselves, that behaviour sounds really difficult, but my goodness, that child went through that. I would do anything to help a child who's gone through that. Then at the end of training, I have foster carers who are like, oh, I think I could look after this person. I think I could do this. And I'm like, no, you need to calm yourself down. You can't look after everybody. Do you know what I mean? We have to, like, as social workers, we make a decision too. So before we even phone you, before a social worker will phone you and say, can you look after this child? We'll make that decision as to whether we think you could look after that child. And then you need to make the decision. if you could look after the child.
The reason behind this was about a year ago we had emails and WhatsApps circulating about Bristol, I think it was, where there were like 300 Syrian refugee children awaiting, picking like a supermarket to take them home, and because they need foster carers.
Croydon?
I was, yes. First Croydon, then Bristol, yeah. The same group had moved.
Yeah.
Apparently because there were no Muslim
And Kent.
carers, no Muslim families
Yeah.
willing to take them in.
Yeah.
So was that total misinformation? Because I
There's
couldn't have
large
picked
numbers. Should I tell you who's quite successful at placing unaccompanied asylum-seeking children? A Christian organisation, which is the counterpart of what we do. They have worked they've been set up longer than Penny Appeal. So we're like 2 years. They've been around for like 10 years, I think. Churches are very active in taking in unaccompanied children. I've actually worked with a group up in Darlington, white British group, who actually aren't a Christian group, but there are a number of white British non-Muslim individuals and groups who are very active in helping anybody who's going through crisis. And they'll be there in Palestine, they'll be there in Syria, and they're here in England, and they're holding, recruitment events in churches and in community events. And actually, to be fair to Darlington, they're really trying to reach out to the Muslims. And there are like these groups, there's non-Muslim carers who will say to me, Tay, we really want to work with Muslim communities. We really want our Muslim children to pray 5 times a day, and we want them to learn the Quran, we want them to speak Arabic. And I'm like, calm down, they've just come into your house, like maybe just let them settle before you start telling them. And they do, like literally non-Muslim carers will have unaccompanied children who've, almost died, come off a lorry. They come into this house and they're like, right, how do you do your ablutions? And let's start you praying. And do you need to wake up at sunrise? And some of these children are like, actually, I just want to go to school. And some of them have never prayed, but the non-Muslim carers are like, no, but you have to, because you're Muslim. And if you don't pray 5 times a day, then I'm going to get into trouble and I've let you down. And, then you're going to hate me forever. And this is what my training told me to do. But really we need, because I know that if they spoke to a scholar in the community, a scholar would say, what are the child's needs? Are they going through post-traumatic stress? What have they experienced Islamically? Some of these children turn against Islam because of what they've been through, the experiences they've been through. So we have to approach it with love and compassion and patience and mercy, not with, no, but we have to because we can't beat them with it. So there is, in terms of the Muslim community, sadly, we have a lot of work to do, a lot. Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you very much, and thanks for coming to speak to us. I have 2 kind of unrelated questions. The first is, are there any kind of necessary criteria for becoming a foster carer? So do you have to have certain financial means? Do you have to have 2 parents? Does it have to be a mother and a father, or kind of 2 people looking after the child? And is there an expectation that at least one parent is working not full-time or part-time? And the second question is about unaccompanied minors. And I know there's a lot around age disputing and the politics around age disputing, because if you dispute whether someone is actually a child, then you don't have to actually put them through the care system. Is there any work being done by Penny Appeal around that, or any other organisations?
Okay, so for your first question, to become a foster carer, the minimum age is 21. But if you want to foster at the age of 21, you'd need to have really come from a fostering home, or had other fostering experience. Realistically, if you're like the child of a fostering home who perhaps wants to continue that legacy with the support of your your mother who's a foster, or your father who's a foster parent, because 21 is very young to be taking in a foster child. Actually, a lot of non-Muslim foster carers tend to be like retired empty nesters. Their children have gone to university, and we do see that sometimes with Muslims as well. But actually with Muslim applicants, we tend to find them as like established professionals who have a spare bedroom, who one of the parents maybe is more flexible with time. So we see a younger demographic, and I think partly that's because in Muslim communities, I think people just don't know that actually if your kids have left and you've got an empty bedroom, then foster. It's good. I think people think that you need to be younger to do it, But actually, as long as you've got your health, and as long as you literally can, I mean, if you're babysitting grandchildren, you could foster a child, right? So you need to have a spare bedroom, and by spare bedroom, that means that you can't put your other kids into one bedroom and then say you've got a spare bedroom, because that happens a lot with, and fostering agencies kind of complain about that with ethnic minority applicants, that they've got siblings who are sharing bedrooms, but we can't have like a foster child sharing a bedroom, but we expect that however many children you've got, you need to have a bedroom for each child and then a spare, which is really difficult. So that's the biggest reason why people will get turned down, because people just don't have spare bedrooms. It's hard to have a spare bedroom, right? In terms of whether you're single or not, it's neither here nor there. Sometimes it can work in your favour. So if you're a single female, then actually you might be more willing to take in a mother and baby placement. So an underaged female, under 18 years of old female with her child, you might wish to bring her into your home to support her with the care of a child. If you're a single man, then actually perfect for unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, because a lot of these teenage unaccompanied asylum-seeking boys actually feel really uncomfortable in homes where there is a female. If it's a female who's like an auntie, they're happy with, covered auntie, hijabi, who they can be all respectful with. But some of these unaccompanied children are going into non-Muslim homes where the foster mum will be up in the morning with a strappy, pajama top making bacon. And over time they build a relationship, and, over time, a lot of these unaccompanied children value their foster carers and what they've done, because they recognise the love and compassion. But initially, that's quite a big hurdle to overcome. In terms of work as well, looking after a foster child is like looking after your own child who can just be going through a really tough time. So imagine what it would take as a parent to have to look after your child when your child perhaps has experienced some form of trauma. You would be there more. You wouldn't think to yourself, two parents, if one of their child has suffered some serious trauma, you shouldn't be thinking, well, if we both work 9 to 5 and we put the child in breakfast club and after school club, and I mean, I do that with my kids. My kids go breakfast club and after school club. They haven't suffered a trauma, alhamdulillah. Do you know what I mean? They're all right. They love the breakfast club. They love their after school club, and they can go to their Abba and all of that, and it's all good. But if a child suffers a trauma, as a parent, you have to think, actually, I need you to know I'm going to drop you off to school. I'm going to pick you up from school. I'm going to speak to your parents. I'm going to be at every school. I'm going to have extra school meetings because you're struggling. I'm going to make sure that I'm on it. Some foster carers, they do amazing work. Like the amount of work they go to. When they talk about what they do for their foster children, I think that's what a mum or dad would do for your child. You go that extra mile. You keep trying. This didn't work, I'm going to do that. That didn't work, I'm going to do that. Not because I have to, not because the training told me to, because I have love for you and I want you to grow. So what we're looking for in a foster care is something in that region. It's not about whether you're single or married or whatever. It's about, do you have the love, the time, the space. Income-wise, as long as you're not in debt, you should be all right. Debt-wise, it's problem. If you have any debts, then mortgage is fine. But literally, if you have credit cards to pay off, what it can look like is that you want to foster to cover your debt. And given that fostering income is not regular, you can't count it as a job, because you might have a child in placement. Initially, it can take a while for a child to come into placement, and then the placements can be on and off, at least until you're more experienced. So if you don't have financial stability, then it might struggle. But if you're not working, as long as you're not in debt, and you're managing, then it's fine. And your second question, I knew I'd forget it. What was it?
Age disputing.
Age disputing. So Penny Appeal hasn't worked with unaccompanied children yet, partly because social worker-wise it's just me. So I had a lot to do for the last 2 years. It's been quite busy. And also, sort of, I guess it's to try and do adoption and fostering well within what we're doing so far before we expand too much. Also in terms of age disputes, it's really very much between the social worker and the legal involvement as well. So I don't know what any charity could do in that respect. I don't think there is a role for a charity in age disputes other than to refer to appropriate legal advisors, but that's not for us to do.
Okay, this is quite interesting. We now have 5 questions left, and I think a couple more wanting. Can I ask the 5 people to ask their questions together, and then maybe you can try and wrap up?
I'm not going to remember all 5 questions.
Very good point.
If you remember the 5 questions, then sure.
Fine.
I'll remember 1.
Are people okay for continuing for a bit longer? Yeah, is that okay? Okay, let's just
Yeah, I'm okay.
ask them.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
Just wanted to know a bit more about the Coventry research, and the reason for that really was, does that cover how to overcome some of the objections the Muslim families have? Because there's clearly issues around that group which is not supportive of this. I know you're talking about the Islamic guidance and all that, but there's much more fundamental humanistic level, not just Islamic level. So, for example, for me, my biggest concern, if I was a contributor, would be I have 2 young, impressionable girls. I would be concerned to bring somebody in, particularly somebody who's vulnerable, until they've moved on. And then perhaps, as you said, more people in their older age would take that responsibility on. There are many other issues like that that causes concern, and that's just one contribution. Does Coventry research go into that much depth to understand so that you can start marketing kind of the right way and try and overcome those objections so we can increase the numbers? I mean, that's just it.
So our researcher at Coventry University, Dr. Saria, she is an adopter herself, so she has a very sort of personal perspective. She sits on the Black and Minority Ethnic Board of the British Association of Adoption and Fostering. So before she started with us, her motivation to do this kind of work was really high. And actually the scope that we give her for the work, so basically I'd agreed with the Department for Education what we want from the research, and I'd put the proposal to her, this is what we want, can we come to an agreement? She came back to me with a proposal that was much more extensive. And I said to her, look, Dr. Saria, we don't need all of this, right? Like, we just needed this. And she said, hey, I was just looking for an excuse to do this work. I needed a remit to do this work. So let's just get me to put through all my work under the name of, the funding and penny appeal. I haven't spoken to her. She's working with Julie Selwyn, who's an extremely senior researcher within fostering and adoption and children's services, very well known. She's very well connected. So I've kind of not had to really get involved, like, who am I really to? They really are like the seniors in terms of research. I'm expecting the preliminary findings in the next few weeks. There will be some topics that she will address. Certainly, there are topics that are specific to Muslim communities. So, for example, family response. Now, when you said family responses, I assumed you meant like extended family. Where extended family are saying to people, oh, well, religiously this, or Islamically this, that's fine. It's, sorted. I was quite confident from the beginning. I'll be honest, the Department for Education were very worried that we'd bring a group of scholars together, and they thought that they'd say fostering's okay, but adoption not so much. That would have been problematic. But I knew that once you speak to people about children and their needs, that actually they're really, really on board. The Islamic bit is fine. We can sort that. We've got the document. You just hand it over. Where it will be more challenging and difficult will be people who say, not really your child though, is it? And, culturally, people are just not comfortable with it, which is odd because actually, culturally, we do take other people's children into our home, but they're just genetically related to us in some way. We'll take our auntie's kids into our home. We'll take our neighbours' kids into our home if we need to. Culturally, we've done that, but for some reason, adoption and fostering, there's a barrier. Those bits she will address. In terms of the other thing you were talking about, whereas if you've got birth children in your home and you're concerned about the effect of fostering or adoption on your birth children, that's not unique to Muslim communities. That's a standard concern. That's actually part of training when you become a foster carer, and that's standard advice that can be given to you by any fostering and adoption agency. So we can look at that, certainly. We can address that, as people come up with those questions, because there's going to be a lot of things, but that's not Muslim specific.
I understand what I said. It's more than just Islamic guidance. I think the point I was trying to make was, until we get to the bottom of all the various objections from Islamic culture, various cultures, you won't be able to address that issue. So if this research can tackle pretty much about underlying objections, both from an Islamic perspective as well as just a normal
human perspective, then you might find that.
Yeah.
that
The other thing I would say as well is that the applicants that we get, people who are foster carers and adopters, when I speak to them about have you had resistance, do people say negative things, and most of them, to be fair, kind of go, because they don't really care. Some of them, if I say to them, well, are you confident about the Islamic perspective? They'll say, I know in my heart that it's the right thing to do, but I don't know what other people will say. That could be because the only people coming through right now are those who are like, we don't really care what other people say. We're looking after a vulnerable child. That's more important. So it could be because of that, or it could be that actually if somebody really wants to foster and adopt, then they'll make the inquiries. You could speak to professionals. Like those sort of questions, actually, if you really want to foster and adopt, you can engage with us to do that. There's a whole bunch of this whole room full of people, if one person becomes a foster care or adopter, statistically that's quite high. So, sorry, I'm being pushed through questions.
Thank you, that was so inspiring. I'd like to know, what do you as Penny Appeal or as a social worker, what would you do to encourage the older generation, so like our parents and grandparents, to sort of bless this generation to be able to adopt, foster?
I think for me, I would want the older generation to start thinking about if they should adopt or foster, why would they need to encourage the younger generation when they need to ask themselves? Actually, the best thing is really to have adopters and foster carers. I would love to be in a position, like the ideal, the ultimate for me, is that we're in a position where if an adopter or foster carer comes into a mosque, everyone recognises and respects that person. If we had a billionaire come into this room right now, everyone would be like, oh, it's so-and-so, he's a billionaire. Did you hear what he did? He's only 25 and he's a billionaire, or she is, or whatever. Foster carers and adopters deserve more respect and recognition for that. And we need to be in a position where existing foster carers and adopters don't walk in proudly, but they should know that when they come to a mosque, they are valued. That everybody looks at them and recognizes that Allah chose orphans to be his prophets. Allah chose Prophet ﷺ to be an orphan. That was not by chance. That was not a coincidence. There was learning. There was a gift. There was ease in that hardship for our Prophet ﷺ to be able to recognize the value of orphans. That's where we're at as a Muslim community, that I am sat here trying to explain to Muslim communities that Islam values orphans, and yet we have foster carers and adopters who are either campaigning for recognition and, less abuse within their communities, or just hiding that they do that. I think once we can change that mindset and really value adopters and foster carers as the best of our communities, I think the rest will fall into place.
Final question.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
So you said that the social workers will do an assessment with the adopters and foster carers, and you'll have your questions and the adults will have their questions, and in the end the social worker will decide that they're capable of looking after certain children. Is part of that just a sort of overall subjective assessment of if it's a couple, what that couple is like, and you're about to make a subjective assessment based on your experience of how you think if they will be able to care for certain children?
The thing with social work, there is a certain amount of social work which is you have to have evidence and you have to have facts. There is a lot of social work which is about relationship building, getting to know each other, getting to know that person, and having an understanding of their capacity. So when someone becomes a foster carer or adopter, they will say, I want to care for someone of this age range, of this ethnicity, this religion. Sometimes it gets really specific to the point where we're on the phone and we're saying, do you have a name for this child? Like you want them from here, for this, for this, for that. I'm like, I don't know who this person is you're looking for. Like it's someone specific, clearly. You can't be that specific. But actually saying that, alhamdulillah, a lot of our Muslim adopters are very open to caring for non-Muslim children and children of other faiths, and we'll respect that. And I think that's real credit to our community, that we have a lot of Muslim adopters who are saying, no, I just want to give a child a permanent home, and I want that child to be happy. So in terms of the matching process, you will come to the process with your expectations, and your social worker, a foster carer and an adopter has a social worker, a child has a social worker. Your social worker will know who you said you wanted to care for. They will also have an understanding of what they believe your capacity is, and they will stretch you, particularly if you're a foster carer, right? Becoming a foster carer is a bit like having a new job. When you have a new job, there's a bunch of other people with more experience than you who want to do the same job as you. So actually, sometimes you have to be quite broad with your criteria, particularly when you start, because when you say you want to care for a particular child, actually there'll be a bunch of other foster carers saying, actually, I'll look after that child too. And then it's the child social worker who will look at all these foster carer profiles or adoptive profiles and say, that's the one I think will match. So it's a decision that's made by everybody together, but no one will ever force you to take a child into your home that you don't want to take. But I do know of certain arm twisting that has gone on, to put it, where the social worker has said, trust me, I'll be fine. Trust me. And then what will happen is the child can come into placement and you might have some really hairy moments, and there might be times when you call your social worker and say, I've had enough. Had enough, I cannot look after this child. And your social worker will say, just sleep on it. And I can't, I'll call you tomorrow, I'll be round in the morning. And then, because if you've got your own children, you'll know. There are times when you're like, I've had enough. Then you sleep on it and you wake up in the morning and you think, oh, Bismillah, let's start again. And that's what foster carers do. And then when they've got more experience, they just know. And actually, once you've got more experience as a foster carer, you'll have these hairy moments and you'll think, it is what it is, I'll get over it. It will pass. I once was with a fostering family who, I went to visit them and they told me that their foster child had stolen their mobile phone. And this mobile phone was like a brand new iPhone. And I was like, oh, you must be devastated. They had a really good relationship with him as well. I was like, you must have been so mad at him. And they went, his grandmother died like the day before. They were like, he's been really great. He's been a lovely kid. And then he'd had this bereavement in his birth family and he ended up stealing a mobile phone. And they just went, if that's all it is, if he's just going to take a mobile phone, it's fine. He sold it for like a tenner. But for them, they just thought, well, if that's how much it's going to cost us for him to get over his bereavement, that was all right. We'll take it because that's what's most important. But the thing is the progress that they'd seen in him since he started living with them to what he's like now, for them it was like, this is amazing. He's a changed boy, so he stole a phone. That's all right. So yeah.
Thank you very much. There are, I think, a couple more questions, but if they can ask you afterwards, if that's okay.
No, I'll say no.
Thank you very much. Can we please give a round salawat with loud salawat? Just a couple of announcements. Firstly, about the program, the coming.